A year earlier, in July of 1846, 238 Latter-day Saints, under the leadership of Sam Brannan, had arrived in California on the ship Brooklyn. They became the first colonists in California under American rule. The old Californians were amazed at what they had brought with them: dry goods, tools, vegetable seeds, school supplies, and a library of 179 books. They had also brought a printing press and a supply of newsprint. Everything needed to begin a newspaper. Following their discharge, many members of the battalion headed directly east to rejoin their families. But with speculation that Brigham Young and the rest of the church might continue on to California, some headed north. Among them, Ezra Allen and William and Melissa Corey.
I thought it best to make my way fast as possible to San Francisco. But my wife, being in a delicate situation, I concluded to stop for a season in Monterey. October 2nd, 1847. My wife was delivered of a fine baby boy. I named him William, after myself. I have the greatest boy you ever saw.
They planned to move to San Francisco as soon as she was well, but before they could leave, tragedy struck. Baby William died. They had only their faith to sustain them as they prepared to join their comrades in San Francisco.
San Francisco is a beautiful place, a fine ship harbor. Things are improving rapidly.
Under Brannan's leadership, the Latter-day Saints had started San Francisco's first school, its first bank, and first post office. The printing press had been put to good use. The first edition of the California Star reached the streets of San Francisco January 7th, 1847. It was the city's first newspaper. Meanwhile, about 80 members of the discharged battalion had stopped at Sutter's Fort and accepted temporary work in order to purchase needed supplies.
Captain John A. Sutter, being desirous of building a flouring mill some 6 miles from the fort and a sawmill about 45 miles away, proposed to hire all the men.
Sutter had wanted to build the mills for some time, but lacked skilled labor to do it. The battalion members, many experienced craftsmen from the East, provided the solution. They worked on a variety of projects. 6 were hired to build a sawmill in the mountains.
We arrived on the 29th of September. The surrounding country looked wild and lonesome, infested with wolves and grizzly bears.
Things progressed well until December. Then winter rains brought high, swift water, which slowed the work. In their downtime, the men built a log cabin so they could move out of the one they had been sharing with the Wimmer family. They moved in on January 23rd. The next morning, as they were digging the tail race deeper, the first gold flakes were spotted. Thanks to the journal entries of 2 of the men, the date of the find was recorded.
Monday, January 24th, 1848. This day, some kind of metal was found in the tail of the race that looks like gold. It was first found by James W. Marshall, the boss of the mill.
The metal passed every test, including the harsh lie of Mrs. Wimmer's soap kettle. The only thing left to do was convince John Sutter. He was skeptical at first, but when he paid a visit to the mill, Marshall and the others determined to help convince him by salting the race. The plan almost backfired when the Wimmer boys found the gold before Sutter did, but he had seen enough to be convinced. It wasn't long until word of the find spread and curious comrades visited their friends in Coloma. On one such trip, Sidney Wills and Wilford Hudson found more gold particles on a sandbar in the American River. The strike became known as Mormon Island and turned out to be the second major gold strike, one with very rich diggings. Meanwhile, the merchants in San Francisco were concerned that the city wasn't growing fast enough. They suggested a special edition of the California Star extolling the virtues of the city and the state. The paper was ready to print except for a couple of empty inches on an inside page when news of a gold discovery in Coloma reached San Francisco. Several battalion members were hired as express riders to carry copies of the Star east, and the few lines about gold which they carried cross-country to St. Louis, Baltimore, New York, and other major cities of the East would trigger the gold rush of '49. Hordes of gold seekers flocked to Coloma from San Francisco and Monterey. Battalion members continued to work for Sutter, but in their spare time, they too joined in the search.
It was mining in a primitive way. We had no pans, no lumber to make rockers, and so we used Indian baskets to pan with. We would dump the gold on a flour sack spread out upon the ground.
At Mormon Island, Ezra and William tried their hand at panning for gold as well.
But we did not stop there long. We were anxious to come to Salt Lake.
After the discovery of gold, all my plans and projects came to naught. One after another, my people disappeared in the directions of the gold fields. Only the Mormons remained to finish their jobs.
The Coloma mill was in regular operation by the end of March. The contract to finish the mill was fulfilled. No set of men was better situated to gain from the gold strike than the members of the battalion. Had they remained just another year, they would have become rich. But they were concerned about another goal, getting back to their families. A meeting was held at Sutter's Fort on April 9th to discuss plans for going. Sutter paid the soldiers in kind with horses, oxen, wagons, and other items they would need. And ironically, while much of the country was heading west to California, the Mormon Battalion was turning its back on the gold and heading east.
Our honor was at stake. With us, it was God and His kingdom first.
Yet even as they were leaving, the Mormon Battalion was to make one more contribution to the history of the West, blazing the trail across the Sierra Nevadas, which thousands of gold seekers would follow. It was a daunting prospect. It would be the highest overland wagon route in the continental U.S., but they were determined to find a way. June 17, 1848, Henry Bigler and two others set out to select a place of gathering. They found a spot they named Pleasant Valley, and the company gathered there to finish preparations. Daniel Browett was elected president of the company, and while the rest of the party was making preparations, he and Ezra Allen, along with Henderson Cox, went ahead to scout a trail along Iron Mountain Ridge to Carson Pass. They didn't return. Finally, the rest of the party headed off after them, 45 men and one woman, Melissa Corey.
The country is rougher than first reports indicated. Brush and rocks give the wagons considerable difficulty in passing.
Most of our time is consumed in working the road.
Wednesday, July 19th. Discovered what looked like a shallow grave and dead campfire. We commenced to open it, and at the bottom, to our great horror, found the bodies of our three friends, divested of every article of clothing and exhibiting marks of terrible violence.
In the grass, we found Ezra Allen's buckskin bag. As the murderers took off his clothing, the bag most likely slid into the grass. It was a time of mourning to think that the man that was to be our leader to Salt Lake was now lying dead.
In all my journey with the battalion, this was the worst night.
The company laid over a full day to prepare the grave of their friends, and Wilford Hudson carved an epitaph on a nearby tree. They named the place Tragedy Spring.